The artist wakes in a world without color. There is neither blue or violet in the shadows that linger in the corners of the room. Yellow has vanished. All the discreet and distinctive shades of gold he mixed on his palette when he painted those somber bouquets, their harvested heads drooping low, and red. The red that had spilled across his hand, down his neck, onto the floor. Gone. The room is a featureless white and devoid of furniture, except for the cot on which he lies. The planks of the floor are aged to black. There's a window set into the wall just above his cot, but from this angle, he can only see the iron bars that stitch the window shut and a meager band of sky beyond the pane. Even the sky is drained of color, overcast, the sunlight diffused into a white, directionless glow. Cautiously, Edward sits up on the hard, narrow bed, and pain rushes in, eclipsing every thought. There's a hot, ferocious pounding on the left side of his head, as if he's been injured. Did he fall and strike his skull on the edge of a table? On the cobblestones? He explores the injury with trembling hands, finds a thick bandage wrapped around his head. At least someone has had the kindness to treat the wound. He wonders if he has the strength to stand, and the next moment, he finds himself rattling the handle of the white room's door. He doesn't remember crossing the room, not that there's much of it to cross.
Hello?
He calls through the heavy painted wood.
Can anyone hear me? Is anyone there?
The only answers are muffled cries, not unlike his own. Some coherent, begging or demanding to be let out of their cells. Some of the cries are merely wails, not of despair or pain, but of something far worse, the dreadful, final detachment of soul and body, the surrender of a mind to madness. Now he understands. A strange placidity comes over him, almost enough to drive back the pain in his head. There's a harmony to this, a grim ordainment. His father said for years that he would end up in a madhouse. Edward had always taken it as an idle threat, the old man's spite showing through the austere mask of the righteous preacher. Ever since he'd turned his back on his father's profession and chosen painting instead, the old man had been belligerent, offended, given to lashing out. And after his father died, the artist had thought himself beyond the reach of the old man's lash for good. But here he is, shut up in a cell, one of dozens of cells in this place, one of hundreds for all he can tell, and each holds a man whose wits, like his, are gone. Maybe his father was never making a threat. Maybe the old man had seen into the future. He'd been trying to warn his son all along that this was where his road must end.
You never listened to me.
The voice is sudden and close, as if it comes from beneath the bandage or from inside his wrapped and concealed ear. He turns too quickly. The pain in his head crashes, a violent crescendo that sends him staggering to the nearest wall. There he leans, panting and shuddering, as the wave of dizziness recedes, and his vision clears to reveal a dark figure seated on his bed, a black shape lone and stark among the unrelieved whiteness of his cell.
You're dead.
Am I?
I saw you. I saw your body. I picked you up, carried you in my arms.
It was only a few years ago. Edward had gone out early that morning into a pinkish dawn with his easel over his shoulder, a box of paints under his arm. He'd wanted to catch the sun rising behind the windmills, those ancient giants turning their arms above the purple heath. The larks had sung madly that morning, drunk with the promise of spring. When the artist returned to his family's home, the day was still newborn. The chimney sent up a pale streamer of smoke as the maids stoked the fire and cooked the daily bread. But as Edward entered the garden gate, he saw the body huddled against the parsonage door. Easel and paint box fell from his hands. He ran to his father, but he could tell by the stillness of the fallen body that it was already too late. Not even prayer could save him now.
If I'm dead, then how am I here?
How am I here? Did you manage, after all, to have me locked away? It always was your favorite threat.
Oh, give up the dramatics. Sit down. We've one or two things to discuss, my boy.
His head is no longer spinning, so Edward moves reluctantly to the cot. He stands there, staring at the old man in the black preacher's coat. It's that damned coat that has him more frightened than anything else. It was always the symbol of his father's authority, and whenever the old man wore it, Edward found he never could deny his father or assert himself like a proper man should. The coat always seemed to him like the mantle of some terrible angel, like God's own raiment. To rebel against a preacher was to squabble with God. Only a fool would do it. Only a madman.
You're dead,
He insists one last time. And it's true. That morning in March, with the larks singing in a rose-colored sky, he lifted the stiff, heavy body that had once been his father and carried him into the parlor. Not knowing what else to do, he laid father out on the sofa while the maid bustled in the kitchen, unaware. And when his sisters came down for breakfast, they found Edward on his knees beside their dead papa, hands clasped in useless prayer, and they screamed until Mother rushed in, still in her dressing gown, weeping and tearing at her silver hair. Later, as the family stood together over the fresh grave, his sister Anna looked him in the eye and said, "It's your fault, you know. You killed him. Or at least, you were the death of him. You'll be the death of our mother, too."
Fathers never die.
Says the specter in the preacher's coat.
Not so long as their offspring live. If you thought yourself free of me just because you buried me, well, that was just another of your foolish notions.
Edward lowers himself to the edge of his cot. He turns his throbbing head, looks at the dark figure directly. How strange that he can do it, that he can stand to see what is there before him. His father's face is slack, like it was that morning in the parlor. The eyes are sunk deep in their sockets, the skin like hard gray wax. And there's a leaden stillness to the figure, the absolute examination of death. Nothing moves in the white cell, yet life and time and reality themselves seem to flow around the ghost in the preacher's coat like a stream of pure water around a stone.
Aren't you glad that you aren't here alone? It's something, isn't it, to have a little company?
Edward thinks for a while. At length, he says,
I am glad.
When the lock on his door clicks and the white cell opens, Edward sits up alertly, wondering how much time has passed, whether hours or days. A young man in a neat brown suit enters, bobbing his head in a friendly manner. His short chestnut beard and the lively flush of his cheeks are such a relief amid the unvaried white of the cell that Edward stares at him with a hungry intensity, starved for the color. He turns to say something to his father, but the specter has vanished. Edward doesn't know when he left. The newcomer introduces himself as Dr. Ray and stands casually in one corner while he questions Edward in a casual, unconcerned tone. Edward answers everything honestly, in a voice which he knows sounds entirely rational. He is rational. His wits haven't gone anywhere, no matter what his father always thought. He tells Dr. Ray what he remembers and what he doesn't. He tells what he's been eating lately, how his sleep has been. He admits that he has indulged recently in absinthe at the brothel down the street from his home, but not regularly, and never in excess. Ray takes down all of his answers carefully in a small notebook that fits in the palm of his hand.
And do you know why you are here?
The doctor asks. Edward hesitates. His father is gone now, but he can still feel the old man hanging about, somewhere up near the ceiling.
To tell you the truth,
He finally says.
I don't even know where I am, much less why I'm being held.
You're in the Arliss Hospital.
Ray says lightly.
You've probably heard the locals refer to it as Hôtel Dieu.
God's Hotel. Yes, Edward has heard of it. A grim place. The final stop for the intractably ill before they move on to Paradise Beyond. And a permanent prison for the deranged.
You were found injured
The doctor resumes.
some 3 nights ago on the street not far from your home.
Injured.
His hand probes again at the thick bandage around his head.
Apparently a self-inflicted wound. A neighbor carried you here and left you in our care. You were quite unconscious for the first day, and only half aware the day after that. You lost a lot of blood, but you seem to be on the mend now. You'll be treated here until you're well enough to go back home.
Will I
The artist asks timidly.
go back home?
He misses the place, his little yellow house across from the park, where he has often set up his easel in the dappled shade. It seems a lifetime ago, not mere days in the past. Those placid excursions into the green sweetness of the park, or through the rustic streets of Arliss by night, when the cafes burned yellow against a sweep of starry blue sky. It was someone else who'd seen it all and painted it. He'd always been here, in this confining place with his father's voice whispering in his ear.
Why, of course, you'll be home soon.
Dr. Ray gives him a reassuring smile.
I've discussed your case with the other doctors and spoken to the neighbor who brought you here. We're all in agreement. You aren't mad, sir. You've merely got a neurological condition. Latent epilepsy, it's called. You've had an attack which led to the self-inflicted injury. It's not an uncommon occurrence in people with your condition. Latent epilepsy can be managed quite comfortably once it's identified.
But if he isn't mad, then why is he here, in a madman's cell? And if he isn't mad, why can't he recall a moment of the past 3 days? That night, an orderly brings his supper on a tray, dark bread, butter, and a bowl of broth. He eats slowly, and all the while he watches the figure of his father, who stands silently in the opposite corner. His father never moves, except to grow a little taller, moment by moment. By the time Edward has finished his meal, the specter is as tall as the ceiling and has to tilt its cold gray head sideways to fit inside the room. When the last of the day's light fades from the barred window, Edward lies on his cot and counsels himself to sleep. God's Hotel, they call this place, and his visit here will soon be over. He will depart, as he's done from countless other hotels in the past. He will return to his old life, the one he can scarcely remember. He'll take up painting where he left off, continue his life's work. Someday he will make money from it. Someday.
You're a fool if you think so.
Edward opens his eyes. In the lightless gloom of the cell, his father's face hangs just above his own, so he cannot look away from those flat, dead eyes. He can almost feel the weight of that ghost crushing down upon him, stifling his breath.
No one wants the trash you're making.
The specter whispers.
Useless, ugly, of no value to anyone.
That's not true.
And then, as the weight of those words bears down into his marrow, he pleads with his father to leave him be.
You've said the same to me all my life. And now that you're dead, you can't lay silent in your grave? You can't give me peace, even now?
But I'm not in my grave.
the ghost answers.
I never was, my boy.
The wound on the side of his head is pounding again, pulsing a rhythmic lick of fire.
Let me be. I want to sleep. I can go home as soon as this wound is healed.
This is your home now.
The voice answers from somewhere under the bandage. He lapses into sleep, but finds no peace there, nor any rest. The dream world spins around him with all the color his confining cell lacks. The streets with their glowing cafes, the burnished gold of hayfields, the dry hillsides bristling with the spines of cypress trees, gardens bursting with violet flowers, and the night sky clamoring with stars, all turn in upon themselves, rotating in slow coils of color, like water draining from a basin. And he feels himself being drawn down into the vanishing points, the places where the world he has seen and loved and painted reduces itself into an unfathomable whiteness, an absence of all color. Dr. Ray won't allow Edward to check out of the hotel the following day, nor the day after that. As the long, dull hours pass, the artist reminds himself to be patient, compliant. He mustn't give anyone the least reason to suspect that he is truly mad.
But you are mad.
His father says confidently, smugly, sitting beside him on the cot. He watches the outside world proceed, as best he can, through the high, narrow window, the light changing as it crawls across the sky, the shadows of the iron bars tilting and gliding across the floor. He listens to the wails that echo down the corridor beyond his cell, the other resident of God's hotel, grappling with their own cellmates, their own unforgiving memories. Now and then, he can't stop himself from crying out in sympathy or in grief at the memory of all he has tried to accomplish and all the ways he has failed. He would stop if he could. He would give up this mad pursuit of his art, this useless, unwanted art. He would listen to his father like a good, obedient son ought to do. But this terrible drive has a hold on him. The need to go on painting even when he knows it's useless. And whenever he shouts with the agony of his desire, the black ghost steps a little closer and laughs in the surety of triumph. On the 5th day of his tenure, Edward asks Dr. Ray for something to draw with. He can't go on looking at the unrelieved blankness of his walls. Ray brings him paper and a few sticks of red chalk.
You can't have anything sharp.
The doctor explains, apologetic.
No pencils or pens.
Chalk will do well enough. There's nothing to draw except the young doctor, so the artist produces a portrait quickly, while the fellow is asking him, as he does every day, about his symptoms, his experiences, his thoughts. It's easier to give the answers Ray expects while his hand is moving, while he's making something of line and value. Easier to convince the doctor that he's as sane as any man on the outside, that he sees no apparitions. When he's finished with the portrait, Ray steps closer, looks down at the sketchbook. The likeness is astonishing, and the speed at which Edward made it is more astonishing still.
You're remarkable,
Ray says. The artist tears out the page, gives it to Ray without another word. Plenty of people have told him the same, but being remarkable has never gotten him anywhere. That night, he doesn't want to sleep, doesn't want to feel the visual world collapsing and bleeding all around him, sucking him down into the white drain. He sits on the narrow cot, his knees drawn to his bony chest, rocking and humming to keep sleep at bay. His father watches from beside the door, implacable, infinitely patient. Now and then, when Edward glances at the specter's face, his father looks the way he did that morning when he'd found him dead on the steps of the parsonage house. Sometimes he looks the way he did when Edward was just a small boy, towering and severe, his eyes as hard and cold as God's love. But the figure is always present, never far from his reach, Self-doubt and self-hatred made flesh. Or if not flesh exactly, then solid enough to feel.
Get out! Go back to your grave. I was free of you. I was. I never thought of you after you were buried. Except to be glad you were dead.
But I was never in my grave. Death never kept us apart. I made you, my child. I made you what you are. And when I said this mad folly would never succeed, I set your path in stone.
It's my path. Mine. You never made it. The doctor said, I'll go home soon.
Amused, the spirit whispers.
I'd wager he says the same to every madman in every cell. Keeps them calm, easier to handle.
But he's determined to get out. Go back to his quiet yellow house, which might never have existed except in a madman's fantasy.
You have no power over me. You never did, you tyrant.
In a flash, the specter crosses the room. Its coldness descends upon Edward's body. He gasps in horrified disgust as something slick and black worms from the outside in. The entry wound burns like a bullet hole in his stomach, and he feels the serpent of his father's memory coil tightly inside his chest.
Get out!
He cries, leaping up from the cot.
Get out! Damn you, get out of me! And leave me in peace!
The other prisoners of God's hotel howl in sympathy, and though Edward clutches at his stomach and wills himself to vomit up his father, he can do nothing more than gag uselessly over his chamber pot. The self-doubt sown by his father's words have always been inside of him, and everything his father has said is true.
You'll never make anything of yourself.
The sly voice says from inside his left ear.
Your life has been a foolish waste. And when you're dead, no one will remember your name. You won't even have a child to haunt, as I have done.
Rebelling as he ever did, the artist takes his red chalk and scrawls over the blank walls, filling them with blood-red pictures. A spinning sun, the reaping sickle of the moon, cypress trees like jagged teeth, a naked woman with her head bent in sorrow. Each time his father taunts him, he draws another image, and the battle continues all through the night, till the chalk is worn down to a nub, and every white surface he can reach is covered in the violent proclamation of his art. Only when morning light fills the chamber does Edward realize what he has done. Dr. Ray will never set him free now. Who but a madman would draw all over his walls? His father's voice laughs inside his head as Edward looks around for something with which to clean the walls. But there's nothing. Not even the thin blanket on his cot will do, for it's as white as everything else. And if he wipes the chalk away, the evidence of the reddened blanket will still betray him. Ray's key turns in the lock. The artist cringes into a corner, covering his face with his hands. His heart is already breaking with the certainty of lifelong imprisonment. He thinks,
I would have liked to see my little yellow house one last time.
Well then, everything seems to be in order.
Edward looks up. A sunny yellow tone suffuses the morning light. The walls are smiling and bare, every trace of the night's madness gone. On the floor beside his foot lies the stick of red chalk, long and intact.
I've just spoken with your neighbor friend. He'll be coming later this afternoon to see you home. Now then, have a seat. I'll examine your injury one last time. Let's be sure the healing is well advanced before we send you on your way. Wouldn't want to end up here again, would you?
The artist sits on his cot, stunned and silent. The doctor unwinds the bandage. It seems to take an eternity.
You've lost the lobe of your ear.
Ray says, prodding gently at the wound.
But the skin is healing over now. You're lucky you didn't take blood poisoning.
A few hours later, his neighbor Joseph arrives with a change of clothing, for he can't wear the white garments of a hospital inmate, and the rags he was wearing on the night of his injury were ruined by the blood. Once he's properly dressed, Edward bids farewell to Dr. Ray and follows his friend across town, through the streets of Arliss, which are exactly as he recalled them, as he dreamed of them in his madman's fancy. He will see his yellow house again. He will resume his work, go on striving, obedient to the passion that has gripped him for so many desperate, fruitless years. He is lucky he didn't take blood poisoning, but there is a poison in his blood. It makes him stagger a little as he follows Joseph back home. The poison murmurs with his father's voice. It throbs in the raw wound of his ear.
No